Imagine you're driving down a quiet street, the warm afternoon sun glinting off the rooftops, as the city hums in the background. For most, this would be a typical day, nothing out of the ordinary. But for Captain Marcus Johnson, it's a day that will turn his world upside down. Marcus, a highly respected police captain, has spent decades serving his community, protecting its people, and standing as a symbol of leadership and integrity. Today, however, that respect will be put to the ultimate test. As Captain Johnson drives his unmarked vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows pulls up behind him. The glare of red and blue lights flickers in his rearview mirror, and the sound of a siren pierces through the peaceful afternoon. He slows down, confused but compliant, and pulls over to the side of the road. His heart beats steadily, but there's a creeping tension. He knows the rules of the road. He knows how these situations are supposed to go, especially for a man in his position. But something feels different. Something feels off. The cop approaches with deliberate slowness, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. The officer's face is hidden behind dark sunglasses, his expression unreadable. Marcus rolls down his window and greets the officer calmly, his captain's badge resting on the dashboard in plain sight. But instead of a courteous interaction, things begin to take a dark turn. The officer doesn't ask for the usual license and registration. Instead, his voice is sharp, laced with hostility. "What are you doing around here?" he demands, his eyes narrowing as he glances at Marcus, sizing him up. There's no respect in his tone, no recognition of the authority sitting in front of him. Just suspicion, just judgment. Marcus, always professional, calmly explains that he's a police captain and that he was simply driving through the area. He expects the officer to back down, to realize his mistake and offer an apology. But what happens next is not what anyone could have expected. The officer's face tightens, and without warning, he orders Marcus to step out of the car. His voice is dripping with condescension, ignoring the badge and title, seeing only the color of Marcus's skin. "Step out of the vehicle, now." The cop barks, his hand inching dangerously closer to his weapon. Marcus freezes. His mind races as a flurry of questions and possibilities flash before him. Is this officer serious? Does he truly not see who he's dealing with? Or worse, does he simply not care? In that moment, Marcus realizes this isn't just a routine traffic stop. It's something far more sinister. His heart pounds harder in his chest, but he knows better than to escalate. Every decision from here on could mean the difference between life and death. As Marcus slowly reaches for the door handle, the officer moves abruptly, his body language aggressive, like a predator ready to pounce. Marcus steps out of the car, his hands raised slightly in a non-threatening gesture. The street is eerily silent, except for the soft hum of distant traffic. The air feels heavy, thick with the unspoken tension that now lingers between them. "You think you're above the law because you wear that uniform?" The cop sneers, his words cutting through the silence. "Out here, you're just another guy trying to pull something slick. I don't care what you think you are." Marcus could respond, could assert his rank, his authority, but he doesn't. Years of experience have taught him that words won't work here. The hostility in the officer's voice makes it clear this isn't about law enforcement or duty. It's about power, prejudice, and control. As a black man in America, Marcus knows all too well how quickly these encounters can spiral. And here he is, standing on a knife's edge. The tension is palpable, and you can't help but wonder, how did it come to this? A man who's dedicated his life to serving the public now finds himself facing a fellow officer who sees him as nothing more than a threat. Marcus can feel the weight of every eye watching, every moment stretching out painfully long. He knows he's not just standing up for himself, but for every person who's ever been treated unjustly. And yet, there's nothing he can do but wait and see what happens next. But the story doesn't end here. What unfolds after this moment will leave you speechless, challenging everything you think you know about justice, authority, and race in America. As Marcus stands on the pavement, the weight of the moment presses down on him. His hands remain in plain sight, fingers spread, as he feels the eyes of the officer boring into him. The tension in the air is thick, suffocating, and it's clear this officer isn't backing down. Marcus's mind flashes back to his early days on the force. He remembers his first few years as a young, ambitious cop, determined to prove himself, rising through the ranks despite the constant scrutiny. He had been one of the few black men in his precinct at the time, facing both the unspoken biases and the outright hostility from some of his colleagues. He had survived those years by keeping his head down and showing that his work spoke for itself. But now, all those years of dedication seemed meaningless in the face of this singular, tense moment. He had spent decades building a reputation as a leader, as someone who could bridge the gap between the force and the community. He had believed in the power of his badge, in the justice system, in the idea that integrity would prevail over prejudice. But today, on this lonely street, none of that seemed to matter. Today, he was just another black man, stopped by a cop with a chip on his shoulder. The officer steps closer, his boots crunching on the gravel as he sizes up Marcus, eyeing him with a mixture of disdain and suspicion. There's a slight smirk on his face, as if he's enjoying the power he holds in this moment. Marcus recognizes that look. It's one he's seen before, in the faces of officers who never thought he belonged, in the eyes of people who believed the uniform he wore somehow didn't fit his skin. "What are you doing in this neighborhood anyway?" the officer demands, his voice cold, almost taunting. He doesn't give Marcus a chance to answer before continuing. "You don't look like you belong here." Marcus clenches his jaw, but stays silent, knowing that anything he says could escalate the situation. He can feel the familiar anger bubbling up inside him, the frustration of years of being questioned, of being treated as an outsider in the very profession he had devoted his life to. But he knows better than to let that anger show. He's seen too many situations like this go wrong. And while he outranks this officer in every conceivable way, that fact is irrelevant right now. Out here, on this street, it's the officer's gun and his unchecked authority that hold the real power. The officer glances at Marcus's car again, his eyes scanning the unmarked vehicle, as if searching for something, anything to justify his growing hostility. He walks around it slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of the door, the hood, as if he's trying to make it clear who's in control. Marcus watches, silent but alert, knowing that this is a power play. A game the officer is all too eager to win. For a brief moment, Marcus's mind drifts to his family. He thinks of his wife, the woman who has stood by his side through every promotion, every long night spent on duty, every challenge that came with being a black man in law enforcement. He thinks of his son, a teenager with bright eyes and big dreams, someone Marcus has tried to protect from the harsh realities of the world for as long as possible. But no matter how much he's tried to shield his son from the truth, he knows that moments like these are inevitable. One day, his son might be in this very same position, pulled over, judged not for his actions, but for his appearance. That thought gnaws at Marcus, fueling the quiet rage inside him. The officer finally circles back, his hand still resting on his gun. "You think you're something special, don't you?" he says, his tone mocking. "You think just because you've got that badge, you're above the rest of us?" Marcus says nothing, but his eyes meet the officer's, holding steady. He refuses to give this man the satisfaction of seeing him break. Years of training and discipline have prepared him for moments like this, moments where control is the only weapon he has. But still, there's a part of him that wants to shout, to demand the respect he's earned, not just as a police captain, but as a man, as a human being. The officer steps closer again, close enough that Marcus can feel the heat of his breath. "I don't care who you are," the officer whispers, his voice low and menacing. "Out here, you're nobody. You understand?" The words hit like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, Marcus's resolve wavers. But he doesn't move. He doesn't flinch. He just stares back, his face a mask of calm, even as his heart pounds in his chest. Suddenly, there's a crackle from the officer's radio, breaking the tense silence. The officer steps back, his hand moving to the device clipped to his chest, but his eyes never leave Marcus. A voice on the other end of the line calls for backup in a different part of the city, and for a moment, the officer seems to hesitate. Marcus can see the conflict playing out behind those sunglasses. Does the officer leave, responding to the call, or does he stay, finishing what he started? There's a pause, a long, drawn-out moment where anything could happen. The officer's hand hovers near his radio, and Marcus wonders if this is it. Is this where the situation will escalate? Will this officer make a choice that neither of them can come back from? But then, the officer grunts, turns on his heel, and walks back toward his SUV. "Next time, stay out of my sight," he mutters as he climbs into the vehicle. The door slams shut, and within seconds, the SUV pulls away, the red and blue lights fading into the distance. Marcus stands there, his body rigid, his mind racing. He watches the vehicle disappear down the road, but the feeling of unease doesn't leave him. It lingers, heavy and oppressive, as if something more is coming. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a warning, a reminder that even a man with his rank, his experience, and his status isn't immune to the prejudice that permeates every corner of society. As he gets back into his car, Marcus lets out a slow, measured breath. His hands are shaking slightly, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He knows he should drive away, put distance between himself and what just happened, but something stops him. He sits there for a moment, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to process what just occurred. But before he can make sense of it, his phone buzzes. It's a text message from his chief, asking him to come to the station for an urgent meeting. Marcus frowns. The timing is strange. He wasn't scheduled for anything today. But as he reads the message again, a sense of foreboding washes over him. Something isn't right. And whatever it is, he knows it's only the beginning. He starts the car, his mind already racing with possibilities. What could this meeting be about? Is it connected to the traffic stop, or is something bigger at play? As he pulls back onto the road, the city around him feels different, charged with an unspoken tension. He drives toward the station, the events of the day replaying in his mind, each moment raising more questions than answers. What he doesn't know is that this day will unravel into something far more dangerous, far more complex than he could have ever imagined. The lines between right and wrong, justice and injustice, will blur, leaving Marcus to face not only the prejudice within his own department, but a deeper, more insidious threat that could destroy everything he's worked for. As he nears the station, Marcus feels a knot forming in his stomach. He's been through a lot in his career, seen the worst that humanity has to offer. But something tells him this time is different. This time, the battle won't just be against the prejudice of one officer, it will be against a system that's been broken for far too long. And what happens next will shake Marcus to his core, leaving him to question everything he thought he knew about the law, his colleagues, and the very meaning of justice itself. As Marcus pulls into the station's parking lot, the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the building that he's called his second home for years. His chest tightens as he steps out of the car, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The station looks the same as it always has, busy, alive with the hum of activity. But there's something different in the air tonight, something unsettling that Marcus can't quite put his finger on. He enters through the front door, giving a nod to the desk sergeant as he makes his way down the familiar halls. His mind races with questions, each one tumbling over the other. Why the urgent call? Why now? Was this related to the incident on the road, or had something more significant unfolded? His instincts, honed over decades in the force, tell him that whatever it is, it's bad. As he approaches the chief's office, Marcus notices a group of officers standing outside the door, murmuring amongst themselves. Their conversation halts the moment they see him, and an uneasy silence fills the air. Marcus acknowledges them with a curt nod before knocking on the door. "Come in," a deep voice calls from inside. The chief sits behind his desk, his expression unreadable as he motions for Marcus to take a seat. The room is dimly lit, the only light coming from a lamp on the desk and the faint glow of setting sun through blinds. The chief leans back in his chair, his eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that makes the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Marcus," the chief begins, his voice low and measured, "we have a situation, and I need you to keep an open mind as I explain this." Marcus furrows his brow, leaning forward slightly. "What kind of situation?" The chief hesitates, choosing his words carefully. "There's been a complaint, a formal one, about you." For a moment, Marcus thinks he's misheard. A complaint? About him? His mind races through the possibilities, but nothing makes sense. He's spent his career building a reputation as a fair, dedicated leader, someone who plays by the book. A complaint didn't just come out of nowhere. About me? Marcus repeats, his voice laced with disbelief. From who? The chief exhales slowly, glancing down at a folder on his desk. The officer who pulled you over today. He's claiming you threatened him, tried to use your rank to intimidate him. Marcus feels a chill run down his spine. His mind flashes back to the traffic stop, the sneering officer, the suffocating tension. But he never threatened anyone. He barely said a word during the entire encounter. How could this be happening? That's ridiculous, Marcus says, his voice firm but controlled. I didn't do anything to that officer. He's the one who was out of line. The chief nods, his expression unreadable. I believe you, Marcus. But this officer has already filed the complaint. And it's not just any officer. A cold realization settles over Marcus as he pieces together what the chief is trying to say. This isn't just a simple case of one officer's word against another's. There's something deeper going on, something far more dangerous. Who is he? Marcus asks, his voice low and tense. The chief opens the folder in front of him, pulling out a document and sliding it across the desk. Marcus looks down at the name printed at the top, and his heart sinks. Officer Bradley Dunn. Marcus knows that name. Everyone in the precinct knows that name. Dunn isn't just any cop. He's one of the most well-connected officers in the department, with friends in high places and a reputation for being untouchable. He's also notorious for his hostility towards minorities, a fact that's been whispered about for years, but never formally addressed. There have been complaints before, but they've always been quietly buried, Dunn protected by the very system that Marcus has tried to change from within. This doesn't make any sense, Marcus mutters, shaking his head. Why would Dunn come after me like this? The chief leans forward, lowering his voice. Marcus, you've been making waves. You've been pushing for reforms, advocating for more oversight, for accountability. There are people in this department who don't like that. They see you as a threat to the way things have always been. Marcus feels the weight of the chief's words settle over him. He's always known that his efforts to reform the department weren't universally welcomed, but he never imagined it would lead to something like this. Dunn's complaint isn't just about that traffic stop. It's about silencing Marcus, about sending a message to anyone else who might think about challenging the status quo. So what happens now? Marcus asks, his voice tight. The chief sighs, rubbing a hand over his face. Internal Affairs is going to investigate. It's protocol. But given who Dunn is, this isn't going to be a straightforward process. There are people who will back him no matter what. You need to be careful, Marcus. This could get ugly. Marcus sits back in his chair, his mind reeling. An internal affairs investigation? Over a fabricated complaint? This is worse than he could have imagined. Not only is his reputation on the line, but his entire career could be derailed by this. And worse still, he knows that Dunn won't stop until he's gotten what he wants. I'm not going to let him get away with this, Marcus says, his voice steady but full of resolve. I've spent too many years fighting for what's right to be taken down by someone like Dunn. The chief nods, but there's a flicker of concern in his eyes. Just be smart about it, Marcus. Dunn's dangerous. He's got powerful friends, and if you're not careful, this could turn into something much bigger than just a complaint. Marcus stands, his mind made up. He's not going to back down. He's faced challenges before, and he's always come out on top. But this time, something tells him the stakes are higher than they've ever been. As he leaves the chief's office, the weight of the situation settles over him like a heavy cloak. Outside, the night air is cool, but it does little to calm the storm brewing inside Marcus. He knows what he has to do. He has to fight this, not just for himself, but for every officer who's been silenced, for every person who's been mistreated by the very system meant to protect them. But as he walks to his car, a thought lingers in back of his mind. What if this is just the beginning? What if Dunn isn't working alone? And what if the forces that have aligned against him are far more powerful than he ever realized? Marcus gets into his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The city lights blur as he drives, his mind racing with the possibilities. He needs to find out more about Dunn, about the people backing him, and about what they're really after. Because if Dunn is willing to file a false complaint, there's no telling what else he's capable of. As he pulls into his driveway, Marcus feels a wave of exhaustion wash over him. But he knows he can't afford to rest. Not yet. There's too much at stake. He grabs his phone and scrolls through his contacts, landing on name of an old friend, someone who might be able to help him dig deeper into Dunn's connections. He hesitates for a moment before hitting the call button. The line rings twice before a voice answers on the other end. Marcus. It's been a while. What's going on? Marcus takes a deep breath. I need your help, and I think I'm in over my head. As he explains the situation, the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. But the more he learns, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just about him. It's about something much larger. Something that could shake the very foundations of the department, and possibly the entire city. And as the call ends, Marcus is left with one chilling thought. He's not just fighting against Dunny. He's fighting against a system that's been corrupt for far too long. A system that's willing to destroy anyone who tries to stand in its way. The road ahead is darker and more dangerous than he ever anticipated. And as the night deepens, so does the sense that everything Marcus thought he knew about justice is about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. His mind was a storm of thoughts, swirling with the weight of what he had just learned. Every time he closed his eyes, visions of Dunn's sneer and the cold indifference in the chief's voice replayed in his mind. He knew he had to act quickly, but every step forward felt like wading deeper into a quagmire. There was no way out without leaving a mark, and that mark could either ruin his career or shine a light on the corruption he had suspected for years. The next morning, Marcus found himself sitting at his kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone. He needed allies, people he could trust to help him navigate this delicate and dangerous situation. His first thought was his mentor, Captain Elaine Parker. Elaine had been a trailblazer in the department, one of the first black female captains in the city. She had always encouraged Marcus to stay true to his principles, to never let the pressure of the system crush his integrity. But reaching out to her now felt risky. If the wrong people found out, she could be implicated. And Marcus wasn't about to drag her into the storm unless it was absolutely necessary. As Marcus weighed his options, the phone rang. He checked the caller ID, surprised to see an unfamiliar number. Hesitating for a moment, he answered, "Captain Freeman." The voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "You don't know me, but I know what's going on. I want to help." Marcus tensed, glancing around as if someone might be watching him. "Who is this?" "Let's just say, I'm someone with a vested interest in seeing Dunn taken down. I've been tracking him for a while. You're not the first person he's gone after." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," the voice replied, a hint of amusement creeping in. "But if you want to know what's really going on, meet me at the old Mill Street warehouse tonight. I'll have something for you that'll change everything." Before Marcus could ask any more questions, the line went dead. He stared at his phone, heart pounding. The old Mill Street warehouse. It was in a desolate part of town, abandoned for years after a fire gutted most of the area. It wasn't a place anyone went to voluntarily. Whoever this was, they wanted to make sure the meeting stayed private. Marcus debated calling it off. It could be a trap, another move by Dunn to corner him. But if this mysterious informant was telling the truth, then there was more to this than he realized. And if there was a chance to expose Dunn's corruption, he had to take it. That night, Marcus arrived at the warehouse just as the sun was sinking below the horizon. The building loomed ahead, its darkened windows like hollow eyes staring out at the empty streets. He parked a block away and approached on foot, every nerve in his body on high alert. As he entered the building, the air smelled of damp wood and decay, the only sound the distant drip of water from somewhere deep inside the warehouse. "Freeman." The voice echoed from the shadows, and Marcus turned to see a figure step out of the darkness. A man, late 30s, dressed in a worn leather jacket and jeans. His eyes were sharp, and there was a tension in his stance that told Marcus this man was no stranger to dangerous situations. "You came?" the man said, his tone still low. "Good. That means you're serious about finding out the truth." Marcus crossed his arms, his voice steady but suspicious. "Who are you, and what do you know about Dunny?" The man glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "I used to be a cop. Worked narcotics for 10 years, before I got too close to something they didn't want me to see. I started noticing patterns, cases going cold, evidence disappearing, suspects walking free without explanation. It all led back to one thing, Dunn. He's been running his own operation for years, pulling strings, making sure the people who owe him stay loyal, and the people who don't, well, they end up like me." "Why didn't you go to IA?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. The man snorted. "You think IA is clean? Dunn's got his hooks in them too. Anyone who gets too close gets shut down fast. That's why I had to disappear. But I've been watching from the outside, waiting for the right moment." Marcus's stomach tightened. This was worse than he had imagined. Dunn wasn't just some corrupt cop, he was part of a much larger machine, one that had embedded itself deep within the department. "Why come to me?" Marcus asked. "What makes you think I can stop him?" "Because you're one of the good ones," the man replied, his voice hardening. "And you've got a target on your back now. Dunn's not going to stop until you're out of the picture, one way or another. But I have something that might give you a fighting chance." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it out to Marcus. "On here, there's enough evidence to blow this whole thing wide open. Money transfers, surveillance footage, communications, it's all there. But you're going to need help. You can't do this alone." Marcus stared at the flash drive, feeling the weight of the decision before him. Taking it meant diving headfirst into a war he wasn't sure he could win. But walking away wasn't an option either. Not anymore. He took the drive, slipping it into his pocket. "What do I do with this?" The man's gaze darkened. "Find someone you trust. Someone who can get this to the media or to an outside agency that Dunn can't reach. And be careful. Dunn's got eyes everywhere." As Marcus nodded, a sense of dread settled over him. This was far bigger than he had ever anticipated, and now he was in the middle of it. The man gave him one last look before disappearing back into the shadows, leaving Marcus alone in the empty warehouse. Back in his car, Marcus gripped the steering wheel, the weight of the flash drive pressing against his chest. He had no idea how far Dunn's reach extended, or how many people were involved. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just about his career anymore. It was about taking down a system that had rotted from the inside out. The next few days were a blur of tension and secrecy. Marcus worked as usual, careful not to give any indication that something was amiss. But his every move was calculated, his every interaction laced with caution. He started to notice little things, conversations that stopped when he entered a room, officers who avoided making eye contact, the sense that he was being watched. He couldn't go to the chief. Not yet. He needed more evidence, more leverage. And the only person he could think to trust was Elaine. She had been his mentor for years, a pillar of integrity in a world of compromise. If anyone could help him navigate this minefield, it was her. One evening, after the station had quieted down and most of the officers had gone home, Marcus made his move. He slipped into Elaine's office, closing the door behind him. She looked up from her paperwork, surprised to see him at this hour. "Marcus," she said, leaning back in her chair. "What's going on?" Marcus hesitated, the weight of what he was about to reveal settling in his chest. "I need your help, and it's serious." Elaine's expression shifted, her years of experience telling her that whatever Marcus was about to say, it wasn't good. "Talk to me." He pulled flash drive from his pocket, placing it on her desk. "This is everything. It's evidence that Dunn has been running a corrupt operation for years. He's got people in his pocket, officers, possibly even IA. And now, he's coming after me." Elaine's eyes widened as she picked up the flash drive, turning it over in her hand. "How did you get this?" "A contact," Marcus replied, keeping the details vague for now. "But I don't know who to trust. I need someone outside the department who can help me take this to the right people. Someone Dunn can't reach." Elaine was silent for a long moment, her mind clearly processing the gravity of the situation. Finally, she nodded. "I know someone. A journalist, not local. She's got connections with some national outlets. If we can get this into her hands, We might have a shot at blowing this wide open. Marcus exhaled, feeling a small flicker of hope for the first time in days. Thank you, Elaine. I don't know what I'd do without you. Elaine smiled, though the worry was still etched in her features. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. You're stepping into a war, Marcus. And if we're not careful, we could both end up casualties. Over the next few days, Marcus and Elaine worked in secret, coordinating with the journalist to arrange a meeting. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, the threat of exposure looming over them. Marcus could feel the walls closing in. Dunn's reach was long, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the noose tightened. But then, something unexpected happened. One night, as Marcus was leaving the station, he noticed a car idling across the street. At first, it seemed harmless, but then the headlights flickered and the engine revved. The car pulled forward, slowly following him as he walked to his own vehicle. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. He had been careful, but had he been careful enough? Was this Dunn's move? Was he being followed? Heart pounding, Marcus quickened his pace, reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, the car sped up, screeching to a halt right beside him. The window rolled down, and Marcus found himself staring into the eyes of someone he hadn't expected. It was the man from the warehouse. "Get in," the man hissed. "We don't have much time." Marcus froze, his mind racing. What was going on? Why was this man here now, after everything that had happened? "Dunn knows," the man said, his voice urgent. "He's on to you. If you want to survive this, you need to come with me. Now." Marcus hesitated for only a second before he threw caution to the wind and got into the car. As they sped off into the night, the tension tightened its grip around him. He had been drawn deeper into a game, far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And now there was no turning back. As the car sped through the dimly lit streets, Marcus kept glancing over at the man behind the wheel, his mind spinning with questions. The city blurred by in the darkness, and the tension in the car was thick enough to cut. The man, whose name Marcus still didn't know, was gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles were white. Something had shifted. The urgency in his voice, when he had told Marcus to get in, Dunn knew. But how? And why was this stranger still helping him? "You better start talking," Marcus finally demanded, his voice low but firm. "Why are you really helping me? And how do you know Dunn's onto me?" The man kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. "I told you before, I used to be a cop. I know how these things work. Dunn's not just some corrupt cop on the take. He's connected. You're not dealing with just him anymore. He's part of something bigger, something that's been brewing for years." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. The way the man spoke, it sounded like he was talking about more than just police corruption. "What are you saying? Dunn's involved with what? Organized crime? The cartel?" The man shook his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Worse. Much worse. Dunn's tied into a network of people who have their hands in everything: politics, business, law enforcement. It's not just about money and power, it's about control. And they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. This was bigger than anything he had imagined. Dunn wasn't just covering up a few dirty deals, he was part of a machine that operated on a much larger scale. And Marcus was now a target. As if reading his thoughts, the man continued. "That flash drive you have, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's more, much more. Dunn knows you have it, but he doesn't know how far you've dug yet. That's why we need to move fast. Once he realizes you're a threat, he'll come after you with everything he's got." Marcus's mind raced. He had thought he was prepared for this, but now it felt like he had been thrown into the deep end of a conspiracy he barely understood. He had to act, but every move he made seemed to pull him deeper into danger. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked, trying to steady his voice. "Someplace safe," the man replied, glancing at Marcus briefly before returning his focus to the road. "We need to regroup and figure out our next move. You can't go back to your place, and you definitely can't go back to the station. They're watching you now." Marcus clenched his fists. Everything he had built, his career, his reputation, it was all hanging by a thread. And now he was on the run, relying on the word of a stranger he barely knew. After what felt like an eternity, they pulled into an old rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. The man parked the car and nodded toward the building. "We'll be safe here for now," he said, cutting the engine. "Come on." Marcus followed him inside, his mind still racing. The motel was almost deserted, with peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of mildew hanging in the air. The man led him to a room at the end of the hall and opened the door, motioning for Marcus to enter. Once inside, Marcus dropped onto the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. The weight of everything was crashing down on him at once. He looked up at the man, who was pacing near the window, checking the blinds as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. "You still haven't told me your name," Marcus said, his voice sharp. The man stopped pacing and turned to face him. "Call me Vince." "Vince," Marcus repeated, locking eyes with him. "Why are you doing this? What's your angle?" Vince sighed and sat down in the chair by the window, rubbing the back of his neck. "I told you, Dunn's dirty, and he ruined my life. But it's more than that. I've been working to expose him for years, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. You're my best shot at taking him down. You have the position, the credibility, and now you have the evidence." Marcus stared at him, trying to gauge if Vince was telling the truth. "You're risking a lot to help me. What's in it for you?" Vince met his gaze, his expression hard. "Justice, and maybe a little revenge." The room fell into silence, the tension between them palpable. Marcus leaned back on the bed, his mind churning. This man, Vince, seemed to know a lot more than he was letting on. But for now, Marcus had no choice but to trust him. They were both in too deep to turn back. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He pulled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. "We know where you are. Time's up." His blood ran cold as he showed the message to Vince. Vince's face darkened. "They found us. We need to move now." Before Marcus could react, the door to the motel room burst open, and 3 men stormed in, guns drawn. Marcus barely had time to dive for cover as shots rang out, the sound deafening in the small room. Vince pulled his own gun and returned fire, taking out one of the attackers with a single shot. But the other 2 kept advancing, their eyes cold and determined. Marcus scrambled to his feet, grabbing the nearest object he could find, a lamp, and swung it at the nearest man, knocking him off balance. Vince fired again, hitting the second man in the leg, but the third was already on top of him, wrestling for control of the gun. The room was chaos, gunshots, grunts, and the sound of furniture crashing to the floor. Marcus fought with everything he had, adrenaline surging through his veins as he struggled to subdue the attacker. But these men were trained, ruthless, and it quickly became clear they were here to kill, not capture. In a desperate move, Marcus grabbed the gun from the man's holster and fired, the bullet hitting him square in the chest. The man fell to the ground, motionless. Panting, Marcus turned to see Vince standing over the last man, his gun aimed at the fallen attacker's head. Vince's hand was steady, but his eyes were wild, filled with rage. "Don't," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "We need him alive. We need answers." Vince hesitated for a moment, then lowered his gun, stepping back. The man on the ground groaned, clutching his bleeding leg, but he was still conscious. Marcus knelt down beside him, pressing gun to his forehead. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice cold. The man glared up at him, blood dripping from his mouth. "You're dead, Freeman. Dunn's coming for you. There's nowhere you can hide." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. This was the confirmation he had feared. Dunn knew. And now, there was no going back. "Tell me everything," Marcus said, pressing gun harder against man's skull. "Or I swear, I'll end this right now." The man coughed, wincing in pain. "You think this is about Dunn? You have no idea what you're up against. He's just a pawn. The real player's there watching you right now. And when they're done with you, you'll wish you'd never crossed them." Marcus's stomach churned. This was worse than he had thought. Dunn wasn't the mastermind, he was just a piece of the puzzle. And now, Marcus had drawn the attention of something much larger, much more dangerous. Before Marcus could ask anything else, the man's eyes glazed over, his body convulsing. Within seconds, he was dead. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, backing away. Vince knelt down, inspecting the body. "Cyanide capsule," he said grimly. "They'd rather die than give up their secrets." Marcus felt sick. Whoever these people were, they were willing to kill to protect themselves. And now, he was in their crosshairs. "We need to go," Vince said, standing up. "They won't stop coming. We need to find out who's behind this, and fast." Marcus nodded, still shaken by the encounter. They had barely escaped with their lives, and now they were on run from a shadowy organization that seemed to have eyes everywhere. As they left the motel and sped off into night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The stakes had just been raised, and odds were stacked against them. But one thing was clear: they were in too deep to turn back now. The fight wasn't just about done anymore. It was about exposing the entire system, a system that had been corrupt for years, operating in shadows, pulling the strings of those in power. And Marcus was determined to bring it all crashing down. But as they drove further into darkness, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if they would make it out alive. As they drove through shadowy streets, Marcus couldn't shake the weight that hung over him.